Everyone expected me to raise a glass and thank my stepmother for saving our family, but I told the truth instead. 10 seconds later, she dragged me from the table and struck me, silencing the entire private dining room. Just as my father ordered the waiters to throw his ungrateful daughter out, my grandmother slowly raised her hand and spoke a single sentence that destroyed every lie they had been hiding for years. My name is Lauren Ramirez, and as I stood in the private dining room of the Copper Lantern, I could feel the precise moment the air pressure in the room began to drop. It is a specific talent of mine, sensing when a disaster is about to strike. Usually, in my line of work as a senior risk analyst, that disaster involves compromised servers or corporate espionage. Tonight, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured lawns of Riverside Heights, the disaster was sitting right in front of me, wearing a champagne-colored silk dress and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The room smelled of expensive reduction sauces and even more expensive performative affection. Bottles of vintage Cabernet, costing $300 a pop, were scattered across the white tablecloths like casual afterthoughts. At the center of the main table sat a sheet cake the size of a flat-screen television. It was absurd. It featured a photo-printed icing image of my father, Raymond Hartley, and his wife, Elise, standing shoulder to shoulder. The text in piping gel read, "Happy Retirement, Raymond," but the image suggested this was a dual coronation. Elise took up 60% of the cake's real estate. I took a sip of water, my throat feeling like it was coated in sandpaper. My phone buzzed against my thigh, a phantom reminder of the transaction alert I had received 48 hours ago, $5,000. That was the deposit for this room. The charge had hit my personal account quietly, just like the payments for the anniversary dinners, the country club renewal fees, and the sudden medical emergencies that miraculously cured themselves once the wire transfer cleared. No one here knew that. Looking around the table at the aunts, uncles, and cousins clinking their crystal glasses, they all believed the narrative Elise had spun for over a decade. They thought Raymond Hartley was a titan of industry retiring on a mountain of gold, and that Elise was the shrewd matriarch keeping the ship afloat. They thought I was just Lauren, the quiet stepdaughter who worked with computers and showed up to family events looking slightly out of place in her department store blazers. My father stood up, tapping a silver spoon against his glass. The sound was sharp, piercing through the murmur of conversation. He looked good. I had to give him that. At 65, he still had the jawline of a man who commanded rooms, even if his eyes had grown watery and elusive in recent years. If I could have everyone's attention, Dad boomed, his voice practiced and warm. Elise immediately reached out and squeezed his forearm, her nails digging into his suit jacket, claiming him. I want to thank you all for being here. It has been a long road, a hard road, but family makes the journey worth it. A chorus of "hear, hear" rippled through the guests. Dad turned his gaze toward me. It was a look I knew well. It was the look that meant, play your part. And I want to invite my brilliant daughter, Lauren, to say a few words. She's the brains of the operation. Folks, come on up. Lauren. My chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor as I stood. My legs felt heavy, like they were filled with lead. In my left hand, I clutched a napkin. Originally, I had held a set of index cards with a speech written on them. It was a nice speech. It was a safe speech. It talked about Dad's work ethic. It made a polite joke about his golf handicap. It praised Elise for her hospitality. It was a speech designed to keep the peace. But those index cards were currently soaking in the water at the bottom of the toilet bowl in the ladies' room down the hall. 10 minutes ago, I had walked into the restroom to splash cold water on my face. I was in the stall when the door opened and 2 sets of heels clicked in. I recognized the voices immediately. It was Elise and my father. They hadn't realized anyone else was there. "She is going to be a problem." "Ray," Elise had hissed, her voice devoid of the syrupy sweetness she used in public. "We need to move Evelyn to the facility by the 1st of the month. If we don't get power of attorney signed tonight, the liquidity issue is going to crush us." I know. My father had whispered back, sounding tired and defeated. But the house, Mom loves that house. The house is an asset we are wasting, Elise snapped. She doesn't know where she is half the time. We get Lauren to sign the waiver on her inheritance interest. We move the old woman to the home, and we sell the property. It is the only way to clear the debt before the audit. Just make sure Lauren drinks enough wine so she stops asking questions. I had stood in that stall, breath held, watching their shadows move under the door gap. I waited until they left before I flushed my speech. Now, standing before them, I looked down the long table. My eyes bypassed Elise and Dad and landed on the far end. Grandma Evelyn was sitting there. She looked so small. She was wearing her favorite navy knit suit, the one she had worn to church for 20 years. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her face was unreadable. Her hands, spotted with age and trembling slightly, rested on top of a battered leather handbag she refused to let the coat check girl take. Grandma Evelyn was the one who taught me how to tie my shoes. She was the one who slipped me $20 bills when I was in college and whispered that I should buy real food, not instant noodles. They were talking about her like she was furniture to be liquidated. I took a deep breath. The air conditioning vented directly onto my neck, cold and biting. "Thank you, Dad," I said. My voice was steady, surprisingly steady. When I was asked to speak tonight, I thought a lot about what family means. We hear that word a lot, family. Elise beamed, tilting her head. She looked like a predator assessing a wounded deer. "Usually, at dinners like this," I continued, making eye contact with my cousin Mike, who I knew owed me $2,000 for a bail bond I posted 3 years ago. "We talk about sacrifice. We talk about the people who built the foundation we stand on." "That's right," Dad said, raising his glass slightly. "So, I would like to propose a toast," I said, lifting my own glass of water. "Not to the guest of honor, but to the silent partners, to the people who actually pay the bills." The smile on Elise's face faltered for a fraction of a second. A few guests chuckled, thinking it was a self-deprecating joke about tax season. "I would like to thank the person who paid the $5,000 deposit for this room," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming conversational and dangerous, because without that transfer 48 hours ago, we would be eating pizza in the parking lot. The room went quiet. The chuckle died in Cousin Mike's throat. "Lauren, honey," Elise said, her laugh sounding like glass breaking. "You are so funny, always the joker." "And I would like to thank the person who covered the mortgage on the house in February," I went on, ignoring her. "And the credit card bill in March, and the country club dues in April." I looked directly at my father. His face had drained of color. He looked like a wax figure melting under a heat lamp. "Lauren," he warned. It was a low growl, the warning shot. "Sit down. Shut up. Don't embarrass us." "But mostly," I said, turning my body to face Elise directly, "I want to thank myself for not calling the police 3 years ago." The silence in the room was now absolute. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator units in the wine cellar. "Remember that?" I asked, tilting my head, mimicking the pose Elise used when she was pretending to listen. "When someone in this family accessed my digital signature? When someone forged my name on a loan application for $40,000? I remember. The bank called me. They asked if I wanted to press charges for identity theft." Elise's hand was gripping the stem of her champagne flute so hard, her knuckles were stark white. Her chest was heaving. "I didn't do it," I said to the room at large. "Because family, right? Because we protect each other. Because I thought if I just paid it off, if I just kept filling the hole, eventually it would be enough." "That is enough, Lauren," Dad barked, slamming his hand on the table. The silverware jumped. "Sit down. You are drunk." "I am drinking water, Dad," I said calmly. "And I am done sitting down. I just wanted everyone here to know, before the festivities continue, that the bank is closed." I scanned the faces of my relatives. Some looked horrified. Some looked confused. But no one was looking at the truth. They were looking at the crack in the veneer. "I locked the accounts this morning," I announced. "The joint access? Revoked? The credit cards linked to my credit score? Cancelled. The investment portfolio you guys like to dip into whenever Elise sees a new handbag? Frozen? You bitch, Elise whispered. It was quiet, but in the silence of the room, it sounded like a gunshot. So, enjoy the wine, I said, dropping my napkin onto the table. It landed on a plate of untouched appetizers. Really, savor it, because this is the last meal I am ever buying for you. And as for the papers you want me to sign tonight, the ones about Grandma? Elise shot up from her chair. The movement was so violent her chair tipped backward and crashed onto the floor. Shut up, she shrieked. The mask was gone. The sophisticated hostess had vanished, replaced by a desperate, cornered animal. You do not know what you are talking about. We had a plan. We are doing this for the family. You are doing it for yourself, I shot back. And I am not signing a single thing that puts Evelyn in a home so you can cash out her equity. Elise rounded the corner of the table. She was fast. Before I could react, she had closed the distance between us. She grabbed my upper arm, her nails digging into my bicep through the fabric of my dress. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed, her face inches from mine. I could smell the expensive Chardonnay on her breath. You are ruining everything. You think you are so smart with your little computer job? You are nothing without this family. Get your hands off me, I said, trying to pull away. I am going to teach you some respect, she snarled. She yanked me hard, dragging me away from the table and toward the double doors of the private room. I stumbled, my heels catching on the plush carpet. It was a surreal, violent waltz. We burst through the doors into the hallway, right in front of the main dining area where strangers were eating their dinners. Let go, I shouted. Elise spun me around. She didn't care who was watching anymore. She raised her hand and brought it across my face with everything she had. Crack. The sound was sickeningly loud. My head whipped to the side. The pain was instantaneous. A sharp, searing heat that bloomed across my left cheekbone and radiated into my ear. My vision blurred for a second. I tasted copper in my mouth. I stood there, stunned, my hand flying up to cup my cheek. The bustling noise of the restaurant had died instantly. Diners were staring, forks hovering halfway to their mouths. The door to the private room swung open and Dad stepped out. He looked at me, holding my face, and then he looked at Elise, who was breathing heavy, her chest heaving, her hand still raised. Dad, I said, my voice trembling. It was the instinct of a child seeking protection. He looked at me. He saw the red mark forming on my skin. He saw the tears of shock welling in my eyes. And then he looked away. He turned to the restaurant manager, a man named Arthur, who had come rushing over at the commotion. Arthur, Dad said, his voice cold and dismissive. He pointed a finger at me. Get this woman out of here. She is drunk. She is hysterical. She is ruining my retirement party. Dad, I whispered. Go home, Lauren, he said, refusing to meet my eyes. Don't call us until you are ready to apologize. I want her escorted off the property, Elise shouted, smoothing down the front of her dress, regaining her composure as if she hadn't just assaulted me. She is unstable. Look at her. Arthur the manager looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of pity and professional obligation. Miss Ramirez, I think it would be best if you stepped outside. I felt a coldness settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the death of hope. The final realization that the man who had once promised me it was us against the world had chosen his side, and I wasn't on it. I straightened my back. My cheek was throbbing, pulsing in time with my heartbeat. I looked at Elise, who was glaring at me with triumphant malice. I looked at my father, who was studying the pattern on the carpet. I'm leaving, I said. I turned to walk away, fully prepared to walk out into the cold Illinois night and never look back. But then, the door to the private room opened again. It wasn't a waiter, it wasn't a cousin. It was Grandma Evelyn. She walked out slowly, leaning heavily on her cane. She stopped in the middle of the hallway. She looked at Elise. She looked at my father. Then she looked at me. seeing the welt on my face. The room was deadly silent. Grandma Evelyn shifted her weight. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply, and with agonizing slowness, raised her hand into the air. "Wait," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of iron. "Before my granddaughter goes anywhere," Grandma said, her eyes locking onto my father like a missile target, "I have something to say." She reached into that battered leather bag she never let go of. And I think everyone in the restaurant should hear it. The burning sensation on my cheek where Elise had slapped me was pulsing in time with my heartbeat, a hot, throbbing rhythm that seemed to rewind time. As I stood in that hallway, staring at the frozen tableau of my family, my grandmother with her hand raised, my father looking at the floor, and Elise panting with rage, I wasn't just seeing them as they were tonight. I was seeing the ghosts of who they used to be, and the precise, agonizing path that had led us to this moment of violence in a public corridor. To understand why I didn't scream, why I didn't fight back immediately, you have to understand the history. You have to understand that before I was the ungrateful daughter, or the walking ATM, I was just a girl named Lauren who loved her dad more than anything in the world. I was 15 years old when the dynamic started to shift. Back then, it was just Raymond and Lauren. We lived in a modest, drafty 2-story house in a neighborhood that was safe, but certainly not wealthy. We were comfortable, firmly middle class. My mother, a pediatric nurse with a laugh that could fill a stadium, had died of an aneurysm when I was 6. Her absence was a physical space in our house, but Dad had done his best to fill it. I remember a specific night, about 2 years before Elise walked into our lives. We were sitting on the floor of the living room, eating sesame chicken out of cardboard cartons because Dad had burned the meatloaf. "It is just us, kiddo," he had told me, pointing his chopsticks at me. "Just the two of us against the world. I promise you, I will always have your back." I believed him. I believed him with the ferocious, naive loyalty of a daughter who saw her father as a hero. He wasn't a titan of industry then. He was a mid-level manager at Hartley Meridian Holdings, the real estate development firm that my grandmother's late husband had founded. Dad was hardworking, a bit soft-spoken, and entirely devoted to me. Then came the Winter Gala. It was a charity event for the company. Dad needed a +1, and he met Elise. I wasn't there, but I heard the story 1,000 times, usually retold by Elise with a glass of wine in her hand, embellishing the details until it sounded like a fairy tale. Elise was a paralegal at a partner firm, but she carried herself like she owned the building. She was beautiful, in a sharp, angular way that demanded attention. She was also incredibly focused. Later, I would realize that her interest in Dad spiked dramatically when she learned his last name was Hartley, and that he was in line for a massive promotion within the family company. She moved in 6 months later. The change was subtle at first, like the temperature rising in a pot of water. Elise didn't like our furniture. It was depressing. She didn't like my clothes. They were frumpy. I was a tomboy, obsessed with coding and building custom hard drives from scrap parts I bought online. I lived in oversized hoodies and jeans. "Lauren, darling," Elise would say, standing in the doorway of my room, looking at my monitors with disdain. "Why do you waste your time with those boring computer things? Boys do not like girls who smell like soldering iron. You should come to the gym with me. We need to work on your presentation." Presentation. That was Elise's favorite word. As Dad began to climb the corporate ladder, a climb that I later learned was heavily subsidized by quiet loans from Grandma Evelyn to make Dad look more successful than he was, Elise's demands grew louder. She insisted that to be a successful executive, Dad had to look the part. We moved to Riverside Heights. The house was massive, cold, and echoed when you walked. We joined the country club, not because Dad liked golf, but because Elise said that was where business happened. "It is an investment in our image, Ray," she would tell him when he worried about the bills. "You have to spend money to look like money." While they were building this image, I was fading into the background. When it came time for college, the money that should have been there, the money Mom had supposedly set aside, was somehow tied up in investments. "It is a tight quarter, Lauren," Dad had said, looking guilty. "Elise says we need to keep the liquidity for the house renovations. It increases the resale value. It is for the family. Can you apply for financial aid? Maybe get a job on campus?" So I did. I went to the state university because it was cheaper. I worked 20 hours a week at the university IT help desk, resetting passwords and fixing crashed hard drives for rich kids who drove cars worth more than my entire education. I pulled all-nighters to keep my GPA high enough to keep my scholarships. Meanwhile, Elise was redecorating the sunroom and convincing Dad that fairness meant pooling all resources into the family stability, which, translated, meant funding Elise's lifestyle. I never complained. I thought I was being a good daughter. I thought I was helping Dad carry the load. I graduated with honors and dove headfirst into the booming field of cybersecurity. I was good at it. I had a knack for seeing patterns, for finding the cracks in a system that others missed. By the time I was 26, I was working for Sentinel Arc Analytics, a top-tier firm. By 28, I was a senior risk analyst making a salary that would have made the old version of my father faint. That was when the dynamic shifted from neglect to exploitation. Suddenly, to Dad and Elise, I wasn't the boring computer nerd anymore. I was the tech genius. But they didn't respect my work. They respected my bank balance. They started framing my financial contributions not as a favor, but as a repayment. "Look at everything we did for you," Elise would say over dinner, pouring herself another glass of $60 Pinot Noir. "We gave you such a stable home. We supported your ambitions. It is so nice to see you finally stepping up to take care of us." It was gaslighting of the highest order. They hadn't paid for my college. They hadn't helped with my rent, but Dad would nod along, his memory seemingly rewritten by Elise's narrative. The only person who saw the truth was Grandma Evelyn. I remember a Sunday afternoon about 5 years ago. I was visiting Grandma at her old house, the one she refused to sell, the one Elise hated because it was dated. We were drinking tea in her kitchen. "Lauren," Grandma had said, her voice low, her eyes sharp, "you are making good money now?" "Yes, Grandma. The promotion came through." "Good," she said. She reached across the table and gripped my hand. Her skin was paper thin, but her grip was strong. "Do not let them eat you alive, little one. A family can be a nest, but it can also be a trap. Do you keep something for yourself? Something they cannot touch?" "I have savings," I said. "Keep them hidden," she whispered. "Never give anyone the keys to your castle, not even your father, especially not him. He has forgotten how to say no." I should have listened harder. The first betrayal happened 3 months later. I had gone to their house for a weekend visit and accidentally left an old debit card on the kitchen counter. It was linked to a secondary checking account I used for bills. 2 days later, I got a notification. The account was overdrawn. Someone had spent $3,000 at a high-end furniture store and another $500 at a spa. I called Dad in a panic, thinking he had been robbed. Elise answered the phone. She was crying before I could even finish a sentence. "Oh, Lauren, I am so sorry," she sobbed. "I thought it was your father's card. They look so similar. I just grabbed it from the counter to run errands. I didn't look at the name. I am so embarrassed." It was a lie. My card was blue. Dad's was silver. But she cried and hyperventilated, and then Dad got on the phone. "Lauren, please," he said, sounding exhausted. "She made a mistake. She is a wreck over here. Can you handle it? I will pay you back when the bonus comes in next month. I just cannot deal with the stress right now." I handled it. I transferred the money to cover the overdraft. Dad never paid me back. And I never asked, because I didn't want to be the petty daughter causing friction over an honest mistake. That was the crack in the dam. Once they knew I would pay to keep the peace, the requests stopped being accidents and started being emergencies. "Lauren, honey, your stepbrother needs to go to that facility in Arizona. It is the only one that can help with his issues. We are a little short on cash flow this month. $10,000, gone." "Lauren, The insurance is fighting us on Dad's hip surgery. We need to pay the deductible up front, or they will cancel the operation. $6,000. Gone. Lauren, I have this vision for a boutique. It is going to be an investment. I just need seed capital. I will pay you interest. I gave Elise $25,000 for that boutique. It was called Lumina. It sold overpriced scented candles and scarves nobody wanted. It closed after exactly 8 months. I never saw a dime of the principal, let alone the interest. When I brought it up, Dad looked hurt. "Why are you kicking her when she is down?" he asked me. "She tried her best. We are family. We do not keep score." I swallowed my anger. I kept paying. I paid because I wanted my father to love me. I paid because I was afraid that if the money stopped, the relationship would stop too. But the final blow, the one that shattered my blindness, happened just 1 week ago. I was over at their house for a pre-party planning dinner. Elise was in the shower, and Dad was out in the yard talking to the landscapers. Elise's iPad was sitting on the kitchen island, buzzing repeatedly. I wasn't trying to snooze. I walked over to move it because it was vibrating against a ceramic bowl, making an annoying noise. As I picked it up, a message banner flashed across the lock screen. It was a group chat. The name of the chat was The Inner Circle. The participants were Elise, her son, my stepbrother, and my father. I was not in it. My thumb hovered over the screen. I knew the passcode. Elise used the same 4 digits for everything. Her birth year. I shouldn't have looked, but the notification I had just seen made my blood run cold. I punched in the code. The chat opened. They were discussing the retirement party. Elise, we need to upgrade the wine package. The cheap stuff gives me a headache. Stepbrother, who is paying for that? I thought the budget was maxed. Elise, don't worry about it. I will tell Lauren that the venue raised the prices. She won't check. She never checks. My heart hammered against my ribs. I scrolled up. It went back months, years. Elise, 3 months ago. Just booked the Cabo trip, first class. Dad, can we afford that right now? Elise, the walking ATM is coming for Christmas. Remember? I will give her a sob story about the roof leaking. She will write a check before dessert. The walking ATM. That was my nickname. That was who I was to them. Not a daughter, not a sister, a machine that dispensed cash when you punched the right emotional buttons. But the next message was the one that killed the little girl inside me who still loved her dad. After Elise called me the walking ATM, my father, my hero, the man who promised it was us against the world, had replied, he didn't defend me. He didn't tell her to stop. He had sent a laughing until crying emoji. I stood in that kitchen, the iPad shaking in my hands, and I felt something inside me snap. It was a clean, sharp break. The grief evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, terrifying clarity. I put the iPad down exactly where I found it. I walked out of the kitchen. I sat through dinner. I smiled. I nodded. But while I was eating Elise's dry roast chicken, my mind was already at work. I wasn't the daughter anymore. I was the senior risk analyst from Sentinel Arc. I was looking at a threat, and I was formulating a mitigation strategy. I went home that night and started pulling the logs. I started looking at the IP addresses accessing my accounts. I started building the case that would lead to tonight. So, when Elise slapped me in the hallway of the Copper Lantern, when the sting of her hand bloomed across my face, I didn't feel humiliation. I felt validation. I looked at Grandma Evelyn, her hand raised in the air, her eyes blazing with a fire I hadn't seen in years. She knew. She had always known. And now, finally, I was ready to listen. "Let her speak," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, staring directly at my father. Grandma has the floor. To understand the explosion at the Copper Lantern, you have to rewind the clock exactly 1 week. That was when the invitation arrived in my mailbox. It was heavy cardstock, cream-colored with gold-embossed lettering, the kind that costs $10 a unit to print. It read, "The retirement celebration of Raymond Hartley." But directly underneath that, in a font that was actually 2 points larger than my father's name, It said, hosted and curated by Elise Hartley. It wasn't an invitation. It was a declaration of ownership. I was still holding the card, staring at the sheer audacity of the font sizing, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Dad. "Hey, kiddo," he said. His voice had that tight, high-pitched quality it always got when he was about to ask for something he knew he shouldn't. "Did you get the invite?" "I am looking at it right now," I said, leaning against my kitchen counter. "It looks expensive." "Right, well, about that," he said, rushing his words. "We have hit a little snag with the liquidity. The company audit is dragging on, and they have frozen the executive accounts for a few days. Just a formality, obviously, but the venue needs the final deposit by 5 o'clock today or we lose the room." I closed my eyes. "How much, Dad?" $5,000, he said. Then, quickly, "I know it is a lot, but you know how it is. You are doing so well now. Lauren, you make more in a month than the rest of us combined. It would really save the day." I looked around my apartment. It was nice, clean, and quiet. I had bought it with money I earned working 80-hour weeks staring at lines of code until my eyes bled. "Fine," I said. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears. "I will wire it. But Dad, this is the last time." "You are a lifesaver," he said, the relief audible. "I knew I could count on you. Oh, and Elise wants you to come over on Tuesday. We have some paperwork to go over before the party. Just some family housekeeping." I hung up. I made the transfer, but as I watched the confirmation screen, I made a silent vow. The last time, I mentally drew a line in the sand. I just didn't know yet that they were already digging a trench on the other side of it. That night, I got the first warning signal. It came to my personal email. A security alert from a brokerage account I hadn't touched in 3 years. Failed login attempt. Location: Riverside Heights. IP address: unrecognized device. At first, I brushed it off. Bots scrape credentials all the time. It was probably just a brute force attack from a server farm in Eastern Europe. I archived the email, but the risk analyst in me, the part of my brain that gets paid to be paranoid, flagged it. Riverside Heights. That was where Dad lived. On Tuesday, I drove out to the house. The driveway was filled with contractor vans. Elise was having the landscaping redone again. When I walked into the living room, the atmosphere was manic. Elise was pacing around in a silk caftan, holding a glass of iced tea that smelled strongly of vodka, even though it was only 2 in the afternoon. "Lauren, finally!" she cried, gesturing for me to sit on the white linen sofa I was terrified of staining. "We have such exciting news." Dad was sitting in his armchair, looking diminished. He smiled at me, but it didn't reach his eyes. Grandma Evelyn was there too, sitting in the corner by the window, knitting. She didn't look up when I entered, which was unusual. "Que mais?" "So," Elise began, clapping her hands together, "your father and I have been doing a lot of thinking. With his retirement, we want to make sure everything is secure, for the future, especially for Evelyn." She gestured to the coffee table. There was a thick leather binder sitting there. It looked like a tombstone. "We are consolidating," Dad said, reciting the lines as if he had rehearsed them. "Simplifying the assets. We are moving everything into a new family trust. It puts the house, the remaining company shares, and the liquid assets under one umbrella. It makes it much easier to manage Grandma's care." "And we need you to sign off on your portion," Elise said breezily. "Since you are a beneficiary of the original estate, we need your signature to transfer the assets to the new structure. We are going to do a little signing ceremony at the dinner on Saturday, between the appetizers and the main course. Simple." She pushed the binder toward me. I opened it. The legal jargon was dense, deliberately so. I scanned the first few pages. Irrevocable trust. Managing trustees. Raymond Hartley and Elise Hartley. I flipped to page 40. Beneficiary rights. "Wait," I said, my finger tracing a paragraph. "This clause here, it says the managing trustees have sole discretion over the disbursement of funds for medical and lifestyle needs. And this part, It says that any prior beneficiary who does not consent to the restructuring forfeits their claim to the principal. Elise laughed. It was a sharp, dismissive sound. Oh, honey, do not pretend to be a lawyer. You work with computers. You fix servers. The lawyers drafted this. It is standard boilerplate to protect the family from taxes. Who are the lawyers? I asked. I do not recognize this firm, Vane and Partners. They are specialists, Dad said, shifting in his seat. Very exclusive. I looked at Grandma Evelyn. She had stopped knitting. Her hands were resting on the wool in her lap. She turned her head slowly and looked at me. Her eyes were clear, sharp, and filled with a terrifying intelligence. Lauren, Grandma said softly. Yes, Grandma? Have you read every page? She asked. The room went silent. Elise's smile faltered. Mother, we went over this, Elise snapped. It is for your protection. Every page, Grandma repeated, looking only at me. Do not sign what you have not read, child. Of course she will read it, Dad said quickly, standing up. Take it home, Lauren. Look it over. Bring it to the dinner on Saturday. We can sign it then. I took the binder. It felt heavy in my hands, like I was carrying a bomb. That night, I didn't sleep. I fed the entire document into my scanner and ran it through an optical character recognition program. Then I used the same analysis software I used at work to flag risk vectors in corporate contracts. The results were chilling. The trust wasn't designed to protect Grandma. It was designed to imprison her. It gave Dad and Elise, specifically Elise, based on the veto powers granted to the primary custodian, the power to liquidate Grandma's real estate assets to pay for care facilities. It effectively allowed them to sell her house, dump her in a state-run nursing home, and pocket the equity. And as for me? The clause I had spotted was even worse than I thought. It was a trap. If I signed away my right to audit the accounts. If I didn't sign, a bad actor clause triggered, aiming to strip me of my grandfather's original legacy. I called Vane and Partners the next morning from my office. A receptionist answered. When I asked to speak to the partner in charge of the Hartley Trust, I was put on hold for 20 minutes. Finally, a man with a greasy voice came on the line. We take direction from the primary client, Ms. Ramirez, he said when I asked if they had ever actually spoken to Evelyn Hartley alone. My grandmother is the primary asset holder, I countered. Did she sit in your office? Did she verify these instructions? We have the necessary powers of attorney provided by Mr. Hartley, the lawyer said. I cannot discuss this further. He hung up. They were using a power of attorney that Grandma had probably signed thinking it was a medical release form. I needed to cool my head, so I walked to a coffee shop 2 blocks from my office. It is a high-end place, the kind where people have meetings they don't want their bosses to know about. I was waiting for my latte when I heard a laugh I would recognize in a hurricane. I froze. I turned slightly, peering through the gap in the decorative bamboo divider. There, sitting at a corner table, was Elise. She was with a woman I didn't know, a blonde with too much filler in her lips. It is finally happening, Elise was saying, leaning in over her cappuccino. Saturday night, we get the signatures, and then we can finally move the old bat out. My breath caught in my throat. Is she going to go quietly? The friend asked. She does not have a choice, Elise smirked. Ray is soft, but he is broke. He needs this trust as much as I do. And the stepdaughter? Please, she is desperate for Daddy's approval. I just have to threaten to cut her off from the family, and she will sign anything. She is pathetic, really, a walking ATM. I stood there, my blood turning to ice, pathetic, desperate. I left the coffee shop without my drink. I walked back to my office, shut the door, and locked it. I sat at my desk for a long time, staring at the city skyline. I thought about the promise Dad made over Chinese takeout 15 years ago. Us against the world. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. If that is how you want to play it. I opened my laptop and logged into my banking portal. I didn't get angry. I got technical. I initiated a series of transfers. I moved 90% of my liquid assets, my savings, my investment portfolio, my emergency fund, out of the accounts that Dad and Elise knew about. I moved them into a new, high-yield structure under a holding company I had formed years ago for freelance work, a company they didn't know existed. But I didn't empty the old accounts completely. That would raise a red flag too early. I left exactly $2,000 in the checking account, just enough to look active, just enough to keep the illusion alive until Saturday. Then, I set up a monitoring script. I configured my system to send a silent alert to my smartwatch whenever a login attempt was made on those old accounts or whenever a transaction over $500 was attempted. I was baiting the hook. For the rest of the week, the pressure campaign escalated. My phone buzzed constantly. Text from Dad. Wednesday, 9:00 p.m. Mom is asking if you read the papers. She's really hoping you will do the right thing. Do not stress her out. Lauren. Text from Elise. Thursday, 10:30 a.m. I booked the private room. So excited. I hope you are not going to bring up money again. It is tacky. We are celebrating family. Voicemail from Dad. Friday, 2:00 p.m. Lauren, pick up. The lawyers need to confirm you are bringing the ID for the notary. Listen, I know you have questions, but you have to trust me. This is for the best. Don't be selfish. Think about everything we have done for you. Selfish. That was the word that echoed in my head as I laid my dress out on the bed Friday night. I wasn't being selfish. I was preparing for war. I checked my systems one last time. The trap was set. The accounts were locked down, but looking accessible. The digital paper trail of their attempted logins from the past month was compiled and saved on 3 different cloud servers. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked tired. I looked like the daughter they thought they could bully. Let them think that, I told my reflection. Let them think they have won until the ink is dry. Saturday morning arrived with a gray, oppressive sky. The day of the dinner, I drove to Riverside Heights with the binder in the passenger seat. I hadn't signed a single page. As I pulled up to the valet at the Copper Lantern, my watch buzzed. Security alert. Unauthorized login attempt. Source. Residential IP. Hartley Residence. They were trying to get into my accounts right now, probably to check the balance, to make sure there was enough there to steal once I signed the rights away. I cleared the notification and stepped out of the car. I smoothed down my dress. I walked into the restaurant, ready to play the role of the dutiful, beaten-down daughter one last time. But I wasn't walking in alone. I had the ghost of the girl I used to be, and she was finally ready to scream. The investigation began not with a scream, but with a vibration. It was Tuesday afternoon, 3 days before the dinner. I was sitting in my office at Sentinel Arc Analytics, staring at a dual monitor setup displaying a threat assessment for a pharmaceutical client, when my personal phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. It was a security alert from a secondary bank I use strictly for online purchases. The notification was red and urgent. New device login attempt. Identity verification failed. I picked up the phone. Someone had tried to set up a new online access profile for that account. They had the correct username. They had my social security number, but the system had flagged the attempt because the address they entered for verification was not my current downtown apartment. It was the address of a 4-bedroom colonial in Riverside Heights. My father's house. A cold sensation, like ice water trickling down my spine, settled between my shoulder blades. It is one thing to suspect your family is greedy. It is entirely another to watch them commit a felony in real time. I swiveled my chair and opened a new terminal window on my work laptop. This was what I did for a living. I hunted digital ghosts. I typed in a command to trace the request header from the failed login, which the bank's automated security email had helpfully provided in the metadata. I ran the IP address through our geolocation tools. It wasn't a proxy. It wasn't a VPN. It was a raw, naked connection coming from a Comcast residential node. Subscriber, Raymond Hartley. I sat back, my hands trembling slightly. It wasn't a hacker in a basement in a foreign country. It was coming from the study where I used to do my homework. I knew I had to be certain. I had to know if this was just a clumsy attempt or a systematic raid. So, I decided to set a trap. In the cybersecurity world, We call it a honeypot. You create a target that looks irresistible but is actually a cage. I logged into an old investment account that I had emptied years ago but never formally closed. I transferred $5,000 into it from my main savings, just enough to look real. And then I manipulated the HTML of the dashboard view on my end to make it look like the balance was actually $250,000. Then, I lowered the security threshold just enough to let a recognized device in, but I set up a silent tripwire that would record every click, every keystroke, and every download attempt. I named the account Lauren, Emergency Fund. While the trap was arming itself, my phone rang again. This time, the screen said, Grandma Evelyn. I cleared my throat, trying to push down the nausea I felt from the IP trace. Hey, Grandma, everything okay? I am just calling to check on you. Little bird. Her voice rasped. It sounded thin, like dry leaves rustling, but there was no confusion in it. The air feels heavy over here. Elise is running around like a woman possessed. She is just excited about the party, I lied. She is excited about something, Grandma said, her tone dry. Then, the line went quiet for a moment. Lauren? I am here. Do you still have that safe deposit box? The one at the bank downtown? The one only you have the key to? I blinked. I hadn't told her about that box in years. Yes. Why? Good, she said. Keep the key on your person. Never let anyone sign for you. I learned that lesson the hard way when your grandfather died. A signature is a dangerous thing. Lauren, once you give it away, you never get it back. Grandma, is something wrong? Come visit me, she said. Before Saturday. I need you to see something. I left work early and drove to her small cottage on the edge of town. It was the house she had moved into after Grandpa died, refusing to live in the big estate that Dad eventually took over. When I walked into her bedroom, she was sitting in her armchair, staring at the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Look under the bed, she commanded, pointing with her cane. I got down on my hands and knees, under the dust ruffle. Pushed way back against the wall was a heavy, fireproof lockbox. It was battered and scratched. I cannot bend down to get it anymore, she said. But I want you to know it is there, if anything happens at dinner. Lauren, if things go the way I think they will, remember this box exists. What is in it? I asked, sitting back on my heels. Insurance, she said simply. Now tell me, why do you look like you have seen a ghost? I sat on the edge of her bed and told her. I didn't use names. I didn't say Dad or Elise. I just told her that someone close to me was trying to break into my financial life using my private information. Grandma didn't gasp. She didn't look shocked. She just nodded, her eyes dark and sad. Desperate people do desperate things, Lauren, and greed is the most desperate hunger of all. I left her house feeling a strange mixture of dread and resolve. If Grandma suspected, then I wasn't crazy. The next morning, I took the trust documents Elise had given me to the legal department at Sentinel Arc. I had a friend there, a corporate attorney named David who owed me a favor for scrubbing his laptop after a malware incident. We sat in a glass-walled conference room, the thick binder open between us. David read in silence for 20 minutes, his eyebrows climbing higher and higher. Lauren, he said finally, taking off his glasses, do not sign this. Do not even touch it with a pen. I know it is bad, I said. But how bad? It is predatory, David said bluntly. Look at Section 4, Paragraph C. It grants the managing trustees, that is your father and stepmother, the power to declare the primary beneficiary, your grandmother, incapacitated based on the written opinion of a single physician chosen by the trustees. Wait, I said, leaning forward. Usually it requires 2 independent doctors or a court order. Not here, David tapped the page. They have written it so they can pick the doctor. Do they know a doctor? Someone who might be flexible with their ethics? I felt sick. Elise's best friend from her yoga studio was married to a doctor, Dr. Aris. He was a cosmetic surgeon, but he had a medical license. If they get a doctor to sign a paper saying she is confused, David explained. They can legally move her into a facility against her will. They can liquidate her personal residence to pay for her care, which effectively funnels the money into the trust they control. And this clause here? It says that as long as she is incapacitated, they can draw a management fee of 5% of the total assets annually. They are going to lock her away, I whispered. They are going to steal her house and pay themselves a salary to do it. And, David added, flipping to the back, this waiver they want you to sign? It is not just a transfer of assets. It is a retroactive indemnification. If you sign this, you are legally waiving your right to sue them for any past mismanagement of family funds. It wipes the slate clean. It all clicked into place. The rush, the pressure, the simplification. They weren't just trying to secure the future. They were trying to bury the past and secure a payday that would keep them in luxury cars and vacations while Grandma rotted in a state home. I thanked David and walked back to my desk. My hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. I called my main bank immediately. I want to place a lock on all outgoing wire transfers. I told the representative, I want a verbal passphrase instituted for any transaction over $100. If the voice does not match mine, or if the phrase is not correct, lock the account and notify me. Certainly. Ms. Ramirez, is there a specific threat? Yes, I said, looking at the photo of my dad and me on my desk, taken when I was 12. Identity theft. That night, the trap snapped shut. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My laptop was open on the nightstand, running the monitoring script for the honeypot account. At 2 a.m, the screen lit up. Alert. Login successful. Device, iPad. Hartley residence. I sat up, my heart pounding against my ribs. I watched the screen as if it were a horror movie. I could see the cursor moving. It was hesitant at first, then confident. They were looking at the fake balance, $250,000. I could almost hear the gasp of delight in that house in Riverside Heights. Then, they clicked on transfer funds. They entered a routing number. I recognized it. It was the account for the shell company Dad used for his consulting business. Then they typed in the amount, $750,000. They were trying to drain it. They were trying to take 3 times what the fake balance showed, assuming there was overdraft protection or hidden reserves. They were trying to wipe me out completely. I watched the progress bar. Processing. Error. Insufficient funds. Transaction declined. Processing. Error. Transaction declined. They tried 3 times, desperate, hungry. I took a screenshot of every attempt. I logged the timestamps. I exported the entire session data, including the device ID, the IP address, and the browser fingerprint. At 3 a.m, I composed an email. I attached the logs, the IP trace, the analysis of the trust document, and the screenshots of the attempted theft. I sent it to Marina Cole. She was a private attorney David had recommended, a shark who specialized in elder law and complex fraud. I met Marina the next morning at a diner halfway between my apartment and her office. She was a sharp woman with silver hair cut in a bob and eyes that missed nothing. She went through my file while drinking black coffee. "You have them," Marina said, tapping the stack of papers. "This is attempted grand larceny, elder abuse conspiracy, wire fraud. We could go to the police right now." "No," I said. The word surprised me. "Not yet." "Why?" Marina asked. "They tried to steal $750,000 from you last night." "Because if I go to the police now, they will spin it," I said. "Elise will cry. Dad will say it was a misunderstanding, that he thought he had permission. They will say I am the crazy daughter trying to frame them. It will be my word against theirs in a messy private dispute." "So what do you want to do?" "I want them to say it," I said. "I want them to admit it when they think they are safe. I want witnesses." Marina smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "The dinner." "The dinner," I confirmed. "They want me to sign those papers in front of everyone? Fine, I will give them a show." Marina reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small digital recorder. In Illinois, we have specific laws about recording conversations, but there is an exception if you have a reasonable suspicion that a crime is being committed against you, or if you are in a public place where there is no expectation of privacy. The private room at the restaurant? Doors open, Marina advised. Keep the waiters coming in and out, and have this running. She slid the recorder across the table. I also have a colleague, Marina said. He owes me a favor. He can be at the bar at the Copper Lantern on Saturday, just in case things get physical. He is a retired detective. Do it, I said. I drove home that afternoon feeling a strange sense of calm. The hurt was still there. A deep, aching wound where my family used to be. But it was being cauterized by the heat of my anger. They thought I was the victim. They thought I was the prey. They had no idea that for the last 10 years, while they were spending money on appearances, I was analyzing risk. I was building firewalls. And on Saturday night, they were going to crash right into them. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a text from Elise. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Sweetie, make sure you bring a pen. XOXO. I looked at the screen and typed back. I won't forget. I put the phone down. I didn't need a pen. I had a hand grenade, and I was just waiting for them to pull the pin. The office of Marina Cole was a study in intimidation. Located on the 42nd floor of a steel and glass tower downtown, it offered a panoramic view of the city that made everything down below look like toys. But I wasn't looking at the view. I was looking at the mahogany conference table where I had spread out the autopsy of my family's betrayal. There were the server logs from Tuesday night, printed on heavy bond paper. There were the screenshots of the failed transfer attempts, 3 distinct tries to drain $750,000 from an account they thought was unguarded. There was the photo I had screen captured from Elise's private Instagram, showing her holding a glass of champagne with the caption, "Almost to the finish line." New beginnings, and finally, there was the trust document, the legal weapon they intended to use to bury my grandmother. Marina stood by the window, sipping an espresso. She turned, her silhouette sharp against the gray sky. You have enough here to get a temporary restraining order. Lauren, she said, her voice cool and measured. The IP trace links back to your father's residential router. The intent to defraud is clear. The unauthorized access is a felony. I nodded, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction, but then Marina walked over to the table and tapped the trust document. However, she continued, her eyes locking onto mine, if we want to destroy this plan completely, if we want to make sure they can never touch Evelyn's assets again, we need more. We need to prove that Evelyn did not consent to this representation. We need to prove that Vane and partners are acting without a legitimate client mandate. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. You mean I have to drag Grandma into this? She is 82 years old. Marina, I don't want to put her on a witness stand. You might not have to, Marina said, but I need a sworn affidavit, or at least a clear confirmation that she did not hire these lawyers. Without that, your father can claim she instructed him to set this up, and he just got the details wrong. He can claim he was acting as her dutiful son. We need to cut off that escape route. I looked down at the papers. I was trying to protect Grandma. But to do that, I had to expose her to the ugly truth that her son was trying to rob her. If they succeed... Lauren, Marina said softly, leaning in, if they get her declared incapacitated because we move too slowly, undoing that legal status can take years. By the time the courts sort it out, the house will be sold and the money will be gone. I stood up. I will talk to her. I drove straight to Grandma's cottage. It was raining. A slow, miserable drizzle that matched my mood. When I let myself in, the house smelled of lavender and old paper. Grandma was in the kitchen, making tea. She looked frail, her movements slow and deliberate, but when she turned to look at me, her eyes were clear. I sat her down at the small kitchen table. I didn't sugarcoat it. I laid the trust document on the floral tablecloth. Grandma, I asked, keeping my voice steady, did you hire a law firm called Vane and Partners? She looked at the binder. She didn't touch it. She just took a sip of her tea. No, she said. Did you ask Dad or Elise to restructure your estate? I pressed. Did you tell them you wanted to sell this house and move into a facility? Grandma set her cup down. The china clinked softly against the saucer. She looked out the window at the rain-slicked garden she had tended for 40 years. I told Raymond that I was worried about the property taxes. She said, I told him I wanted to make sure you were taken care of. She turned back to me. A small, sad smile played on her lips. He told me he would take care of the paperwork, she whispered. He told me I didn't need to worry my pretty little head about the details. That is what your grandfather used to say. Raymond sounds so much like him sometimes. I reached across the table and took her hand. It was cold. They are trying to take everything. Grandma, I said, my voice cracking. They drafted a document that gives them total control. They want to declare you incompetent. I expected her to cry. I expected her to be shocked. Instead, Grandma Evelyn pulled her hand away and reached into the pocket of her cardigan. She pulled out a small brass key. I know, she said. I stared at her, you know. I am old, Lauren, but I am not stupid, she said, her voice suddenly firm. Stripped of the frailty she showed the rest of the world. I have seen the way Elise looks at my jewelry. I have seen the way Raymond looks at this house. Not as a home, but as a line item on a balance sheet. She pushed the key toward me. 3 years ago, I went to see my own lawyer. She said, Mr. Henderson, do you remember him? He handled your grandfather's probate. I nodded, stunned. We set up an irrevocable trust, she continued, the Evelyn Hartley Legacy Trust. It holds the deed to this house. It holds the majority voting shares of the company, and it holds the investment accounts. My mouth fell open. You did? I named a trustee, she said, her eyes twinkling with a fierce intelligence. A sole trustee, someone who has never asked me for a penny, someone who has paid my bills when she thought I wasn't looking. Me? I whispered. You, she confirmed, but I told Mr. Henderson to keep it dormant, to keep it secret. I wanted to give Raymond a chance. I wanted to believe that my son would eventually find his way back to being a good man. She looked down at the fraudulent document on the table. I suppose I have my answer, she said. I felt a rush of relief so powerful it made me dizzy. Grandma wasn't the victim. She was the grandmaster. She had been 5 moves ahead of them the entire time. So we are safe, I said. Exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding for a week. The house is safe. We can just tell them to stop. We can cancel the dinner. No, Grandma said sharply. I looked at her. No? If we cancel the dinner, they will just try again, she said. They will find another way. They will try to manipulate me or guilt you. They will work in the shadows. She leaned forward, her face hard. I want them to say it, she said. I want Raymond to look me in the eye and hand me that pen. I want to see how far he's willing to go. But Grandma, it will be a scene, I argued. Let it be a scene, she said. If they want to treat us like fools, let them do it in public. Let them expose themselves. And when they do, when they have shown everyone exactly who they are, then you can drop the hammer. I drove back to the city with a new directive. The strategy had shifted. We weren't just preventing a crime. We were orchestrating a sting operation. I met Marina again late that afternoon. When I told her about Grandma's secret trust, she actually laughed out loud, a rare sound in her office. I like your grandmother, Marina said, pulling a fresh legal pad. Okay, this changes the filing. We are not just filing for protection. We are filing for fraud, conspiracy, and we are going to petition for an immediate removal of your father from the company board based on breach of fiduciary duty. If he is trying to defraud the majority shareholder, he cannot run the company. She handed me a thick envelope. These are the filings, she said. I will have a courier standing by at the courthouse on Monday morning. But for Saturday night, you need to be bulletproof. I spent the rest of Friday preparing my technical loadout. I felt less like a daughter going to a party and more like a spy infiltrating a hostile nation. I took my smartphone and installed a high-fidelity audio recording app that could run in the background even if the phone appeared to be off. I adjusted the gain settings to pick up conversation in a noisy restaurant environment. Then, I configured my smartwatch. I set the side button to trigger a silent emergency alert to Marina's phone if things got physical. But I needed a witness, someone neutral, someone who couldn't be accused of being part of a family vendetta. I walked over to the desk of Marcus, a senior forensic analyst at Sentinel Arc. Marcus was a former beat cop who had pivoted to cybercrime. He was 6'4", built like a linebacker, and had a face that naturally discouraged people from messing with him. "Hey, Marcus," I said, leaning on his cubicle wall. "Do you like fancy shrimp?" He looked up, raising an eyebrow. "I love fancy shrimp. Why?" "I have a job for you," I said, "off the books. I need you to sit at a bar tomorrow night, eat expensive food on my dime, and watch my back." He looked at my face, saw the tension in my jaw, the dark circles under my eyes. "Family drama?" he asked. "Family crime," I corrected. "I am in," he said. "Text me the address." The final piece of the preparation was the money. Saturday morning, 4 hours before the party, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop. I had left $2,000 in the joint account to keep up appearances, to make them think the walking ATM was still operational. But now, it was time to cut the cord. I logged in. I initiated a transfer for $1,950. I moved it to a charity for digital literacy. Balance remaining, $50. I left just enough so the account wouldn't auto-close. Just enough so that when they tried to check it during dinner, and I knew they would see that the well had run dry. I wanted them to panic. I wanted them to feel the sudden, terrifying realization that the safety net was gone. I needed them desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. Desperate people say things they can't take back. I closed the laptop. The apartment was quiet. I walked into my bedroom and looked at the dress I was going to wear. It was a dark emerald green, sharp and tailored. It looked like armor. I started to get ready, applying my makeup with the precision of war paint. But as I looked in the mirror, applying mascara, my hand trembled. Just once. I put the wand down and gripped the edge of the sink. I was ready. I had the evidence. I had the lawyer. I had the witness. I had Grandma on my side. I held all the cards. But deep down, in a place I couldn't completely silence, a small, stupid part of me was praying that I was wrong. I imagined a scenario where I walked into that restaurant and Dad pulled me aside. I imagined him saying, "Lauren, I stopped it. I realized what we were doing was wrong. I chose you. I chose Mom." I imagined him firing the lawyers. I imagined him telling Elise that enough was enough. It was a fantasy. I knew it was a fantasy. The IP logs didn't lie. The trust document didn't lie. The laughing crying emoji in the group chat didn't lie. But hope is a cruel thing. It hangs on even when you try to kill it. I took a deep breath, staring at my reflection. "You are not going there to be his daughter," I told myself aloud. "You are going there to be the risk analyst. Do the job." I picked up my clutch. Inside was my phone, already recording. Inside was the key to Grandma's lockbox. Inside was a tube of lipstick and a folded copy of the IP trace logs. I walked out of my apartment and locked the door. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Marcus. "I am at the bar. Visibility is good. Good luck." I got into my car and started the engine. The drive to Riverside Heights usually took 40 minutes. Tonight, I felt like I was driving toward an execution. I just had to make sure I wasn't the one on the block. I pulled out of the garage and merged onto the highway. The sky was darkening, the clouds bruising purple and black. It was time to go to the party. The Copper Lantern was the kind of establishment that prided itself on being intimidating. The lighting was low and amber. The walls were paneled in mahogany that probably cost more than my first car, and the air smelled of truffle oil and old money. I walked toward the private room in the back, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor of the foyer. I checked my phone. I was exactly 14 minutes late. I had timed it perfectly. I didn't want to be part of the mingling. I didn't want the awkward small talk or the fake hugs. I wanted to walk in when everyone was seated, when the tension was already high, making myself the unavoidable focal point of the evening. The double doors to the private room were open. Inside, a long table was set with terrifying precision. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandeliers. The centerpieces were elaborate arrangements of white orchids. Elise's favorite, of course. As I stepped into the doorway, the hum of conversation died down. 20 heads turned. My father, Raymond, was at the head of the table, a glass of scotch in his hand. Elise sat to his right, looking like a monarch holding court. She was wearing a silver dress that shimmered like fish scales, and she was currently laughing at something a waiter was saying as he poured wine into her glass. She spotted me. The smile didn't leave her face, but her eyes hardened into diamonds. "Well, look who finally decided to join the family," Elise announced. Her voice pitched loud enough to carry to the back corners of the room. "We were just taking bets on whether you were coming. Lauren, I told your father." "Oh, she is probably off saving the world with those computers of hers. It must be so exhausting, being the only person who works for a living." A ripple of polite, uncomfortable laughter went through the room. My cousin Mike looked down at his plate. Aunt Sarah offered me a weak, apologetic smile. "Sorry I am late," I said, my voice calm. Traffic coming out of the city was a nightmare. Sit, Dad said, waving his hand magnanimously. He looked flushed, his cheeks boasting the rosy glow of someone who was 3 drinks in. "You are here now. That is what matters. Family is all together." I walked to the empty chair on Dad's left side, opposite Elise. As I pulled it out, I noticed something lying on the charger plate. It wasn't a menu. It was a crisp, white document, stapled in the corner. The Hartley Family Consolidated Trust, Beneficiary Consent Form. I glanced around the table. Similar documents were placed at the seats of my 2 step-siblings and a few key cousins. Elise wasn't wasting time. She had set the table with legal traps before the appetizers had even arrived. "Just a little housekeeping before the fun starts," Elise said, catching my eye. She tapped a manicured fingernail against her wine glass. "Raymond and I thought it would be beautiful to get the boring paperwork out of the way, so we can toast to the future with clear hearts. There are pens right there. It is just a standard restructuring, for Grandma." I looked down the table. Grandma Evelyn was there, sitting quietly at the far end. She looked small in her chair. She wasn't eating the bread. She wasn't drinking the wine. She was just watching, her hands resting on that battered leather bag in her lap. She met my gaze and gave a microscopic nod. "Wait," her eyes said. Dad stood up, clearing his throat. The room fell silent. "Thank you all for coming," he began, swaying slightly. "Tonight is a big night. 35 years at Hartley Meridian. It has been a ride, but it is time to pass the torch. I am officially stepping back from daily operations." He paused for applause. The guests clapped dutifully. "But retirement does not mean the end," Dad continued, his voice gaining strength. "It means securing the legacy. Elise and I have been working tirelessly with our legal team to ensure that this family remains strong for generations. That is what these papers are about. Unity, protection." He conveniently left out the fact that he couldn't legally restructure the company without the majority shareholders' vote, and the majority shareholder was the silent 80-year-old woman at the end of the table, whom he was planning to declare incapacitated. "To the future!" Elise cheered, raising her glass high, "and to everyone doing their part to support the family vision." "To the future," the guests murmured. I sat there, my hand resting on the tablecloth. I could feel the cold sweat on the back of my neck. This was it, the pressure cooker. A waiter appeared over my shoulder, pouring a heavy pour of Cabernet into my glass. As the dark red liquid swirled, my left wrist buzzed. It was a sharp, insistent vibration from my smartwatch. I glanced down, keeping my movement subtle. Alert. Security breach. Source: secondary checking account ending in 449. Action: login attempted. IP address: 192.168.1.5. Hartley residence. Status, password verified. Two-factor authentication prompted. My blood ran cold. They were doing it right now. While I was sitting here, while my father was giving a speech about family unity, while Elise was smiling at me across the table. Someone was at their house, likely my stepbrother who was conspicuously absent from the table, or perhaps an automated script they had set up to run at a specific time, trying to break into my bank account. They assumed I would be distracted. They assumed I would be drunk. They assumed my phone would be in my purse, silenced for the party. They were trying to rob me while looking me in the eye. Another buzz. Action. Wire transfer. Initiated. Amount, $50,000. Status, failed. Insufficient funds. I saw the notification flash red. They had tried to take $50,000. They had hit the empty wall I had built yesterday. Something inside me fractured. It wasn't a loud break. It was the quiet, final snap of a tether that had been holding me to this family for 30 years. The sadness evaporated. The hope that my father would redeem himself turned to ash. All that was left was a cold, diamond-hard rage. I reached out and tapped the screen of my phone, ensuring the recording app was active. Then, I pushed my chair back. The screech of the chair legs against the wooden floor was loud. Heads turned. "Lauren," Dad said, looking annoyed. "We are in the middle of a toast." "I know," I said. My voice was steady, terrifyingly steady. "I would like to add to it." Elise rolled her eyes. "Oh, God, make it quick, Lauren. The soup is coming." I picked up my water glass. I didn't touch the wine. I walked around the table until I was standing near the head, positioned between Dad and Elise, commanding the room. "Dad talks a lot about legacy," I began, looking at the faces of my relatives. "And when I look around this room, I think about history. I think about my mother." The room went quiet. Mentioning my dead mother was usually taboo at Elise's events. "My mom was a nurse," I said. "She worked 12-hour shifts. She didn't care about country clubs or private dining rooms. She cared about people. And when she died, Dad made me a promise. We were sitting on the floor of our old apartment, eating takeout. He told me that money didn't matter. He told me it was just the two of us against the world." I looked down at Dad. He was staring at his scotch, refusing to meet my eyes. His hand was trembling slightly. "But promises change," I said, my voice hardening. "And so do people. And apparently, so do bank accounts." "Lauren, sit down," Elise hissed, her smile fixed but her eyes darting around the room to see if the guests noticed the tension. "You are embarrassing yourself." "Am I?" I asked. I turned to face her. "Because I think the only embarrassing thing here is the notification I just got on my watch." I held up my wrist. 3 minutes ago, I announced, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room. While we were all clapping for Dad, someone logged into my personal bank account using my social security number and my old password. A gasp went through the room. My aunt dropped her fork. It clattered loudly against her china plate. "What are you talking about?" Dad said, his face draining of color. "You are drunk." "I am stone-cold sober, Dad," I said, "and I have the logs." The login attempt came from the IP address registered to your house in Riverside Heights. The device used was an iPad with the serial number ending in 894. Elise stiffened. She stopped breathing. "That is impossible," she said, her voice shrill. "You are making this up. You are just trying to cause a scene because you are jealous that this night is not about you." "Am I?" I repeated. I pulled a folded piece of paper from my clutch. It was the printout of the logs from the last month. "Let's look at the history, shall we?" I unfolded the paper. It rustled in the dead silence of the room. "August 12th, I read. 7:15 in the evening, a login attempt on my investment portfolio failed. I looked at Dad. "We were on FaceTime that night. Dad, do you remember? You were asking me about my promotion. You were smiling at me through the screen, telling me how proud you were, and at the exact same second, someone in your house was typing in my password to try and transfer $10,000 out of my savings. Dad looked like he was going to be sick. Sweat was beading on his forehead. His hands were fumbling under the table, searching for his phone, probably trying to text whoever was at the house to stop. July 4th, I continued, reading the next line. Failed login, 4 attempts. This was while I was paying for the caterer for the family barbecue. The barbecue where Elise told everyone she paid for the brisket. Stop it! Elise shrieked. She slammed her hand on the table. This is insane. She is paranoid. She has always been mentally unstable. The bank does not have mental health issues. Elise, I said coldly. The bank has fraud alerts, and right now, the fraud department has a file on this family that is 3 inches thick. You ungrateful little bitch, Elise spat. The venom in her voice was so pure, so unfiltered, that the guests recoiled. I paid for this room, I said, ignoring her, talking to the room now. I paid for the deposit on this dinner. I paid for the mortgage on your house last month. I paid for the car you drive. Dad, I have been the bank for 10 years, and you repaid me by trying to steal what little I had left. I said stop, Elise screamed. She stood up. Her chair flew backward. She didn't look like a socialite anymore. She looked like a cornered animal. She lunged at me. It happened fast, but in my mind, it was in slow motion. Elise grabbed my upper arm, her nails digging into my flesh through the silk of my dress. She yanked me hard, away from the table, away from the guests. You are ruining everything, she screamed in my face. We had a plan, you selfish, miserable girl. She dragged me toward the open doors of the private room. I stumbled, my heels catching on the carpet. Let go of me, I yelled. We spilled out into the hallway. This was the main corridor of the restaurant, lined with other diners, waiters carrying trays, and the manager, Arthur, who was looking on in horror. Elise spun me around. Her face was twisted, ugly with rage. You think you are so smart? She hissed. You are nothing. You owe us everything. And then, she did it. She pulled her arm back and swung. Her open palm connected with my cheek with a sound like a cracking whip. Smack. The force of the blow knocked my head to the side. My ear rang. A stinging, burning heat exploded across my face. I stumbled back, clutching my cheek. The entire restaurant seemed to freeze. The music stopped. Conversations died. Every single eye in the establishment was fixed on us. My father had followed us out. He stood in the doorway of the private room, looking at me, then at Elise. Dad, I said, my voice trembling. It wasn't acting. The physical shock of the violence brought tears to my eyes. He looked at the red mark forming on my face. He looked at Elise, who was panting, her chest heaving, looking wild. Then Raymond Hartley made his choice. He turned to the manager. Get her out of here, Dad said, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is drunk. She is attacking my wife. Get this woman off the property immediately. Dad, she just hit me, I whispered. I said get her out, he roared, his voice cracking with desperation. She is hysterical. She is making a scene. Elise smoothed her dress, her mask slipping back into place with terrifying speed. Please, Arthur, she said to the manager, playing the victim instantly. We are trying to have a retirement dinner. My stepdaughter is unwell. She has been off her medication. Please, just remove her so we can have some peace. I stood there, one hand on my burning cheek, looking at the man who had once held me and promised to protect me. I looked at the woman who had turned him into a stranger. And then, over my father's shoulder, back inside the private room, I saw movement. Grandma Evelyn was reaching into her bag. Her eyes were locked on mine. She gave me a single, sharp nod. Go, her eyes said. Let them dig the grave. I straightened my spine. I lowered my hand from my face. I am leaving, I said, my voice cutting through the silence of the hallway. But do not worry, Dad. The bill for tonight? It is on me, just like everything else. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I walked out into the cold night air, the sound of the slap still echoing in my ears, knowing that inside that room, the timer on the bomb was ticking down to 0. The ice pack Arthur handed me was so cold it burned, a sharp, numbing contrast to the heat radiating from my left cheek. I held it against my face, standing just outside the threshold of the private dining room, listening to the murmur of voices inside. My ear was ringing, a high-pitched whine that sounded like a broken frequency, but it wasn't loud enough to drown out the performance Elise was currently giving to our family. "Ms. Ramirez," Arthur whispered, leaning in close. He was a good man, a professional who had seen too many rich people behave badly, but I could see genuine concern in his eyes. "Do you want me to call the police? That was assault. I saw it. My staff saw it." I looked at him. The temptation was so strong it made my knees weak. I could end this right now. I could have Elise put in handcuffs in front of the country club set. I could watch her get dragged out screaming. But then I thought of Grandma Evelyn. She was still sitting in that room, trapped between a son who had lost his moral compass and a daughter-in-law who was a shark in sequins. If the police came now, the dinner would end in chaos. The family would scatter. Elise would play the victim to the officers, claiming it was a domestic dispute, and Grandma would be whisked away back to that house, back behind the enemy lines before she had a chance to speak her truth. "Not yet," I told Arthur, my voice sounding strangely detached, like I was speaking from underwater. "If you call them now, she wins. She spins the story." Arthur hesitated, then nodded. "I will be at the bar. Just say the word." I took a deep breath, lowered the ice pack, and turned back toward the open doors. I didn't walk away. I walked back in. The scene inside was a masterclass in manipulation. Elise was no longer the raging banshee who had slapped me. She had collapsed into her chair, dabbing at dry eyes with a linen napkin, while my aunts and cousins hovered around her, looking uncertain and terrified. "I just don't know what to do anymore," Elise was saying, her voice trembling with practiced sorrow. "We have tried everything. We have tried to get her help, but the stress of that job, living in the city, it has broken her. She is having a psychotic break. Did you hear the things she was saying? Accusing her own father of stealing? It is paranoia. Pure paranoia." "She seemed pretty specific about the bank logs," Cousin Mike muttered, looking at his wine glass. "That is part of the delusion. Michael," Elise snapped, then softened immediately. "That is how the illness works. She constructs these elaborate fantasies to justify her hostility. She cannot handle the fact that Raymond is retiring and focusing on us. She feels abandoned, so she attacks." My father was standing behind her, his hand on her shoulder. He looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. For a second, I saw shame in his eyes. I saw the father who used to carry me on his shoulders. But then he looked at the guests, at the expectant faces of the people he needed to impress, and he killed that part of himself. "It is true," Dad said, addressing the room, his voice heavy with fake gravitas. "Lauren has always had emotional difficulties, ever since her mother passed away." I felt like I had been punched in the gut. He was using Mom. He was using the tragedy of my childhood, the defining trauma of my life, to cover up his financial crimes. "She never really processed the grief," Dad continued, warming to the lie. "She bottles it up, and then she explodes. We have been worried about her stability for a long time. That is why we didn't want to burden her with the financial details of the estate. She just isn't capable of handling it right now." I stood there, gripping the doorframe. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the table over, but I stood still. I let the words hit me. I let them carve out the last remaining pieces of love I had for him, leaving me hollow and ready for what had to be done. Elise looked up and saw me. She didn't look afraid. She looked triumphant. She thought she had won the narrative. "Oh, Lauren," she sighed, shaking her head. "You came back. Good. Maybe now you can apologize and we can try to salvage this night." She picked up the trust document, the one I had refused to sign, and smoothed it out on the tablecloth. "Given your episode in the hallway," Elise said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "I think it is even more important that we get this settled tonight. Clearly, you are not in a state of mind to manage your own financial interests regarding the Hartley estate. It would be negligent of us to let you have that pressure." She uncapped a fountain pen. "We can add a rider," Elise suggested, looking at the lawyers in the room, my cousins who were nodding along because they just wanted the yelling to stop. "We place Lauren's share of the inheritance into a managed subtrust. Raymond and I will oversee it for her safety, just until she gets better." "That sounds sensible," Aunt Sarah said quietly. "If she is sick—" "I am not sick," I said. My voice was raspy, but it cut through the room. Elise ignored me. She held the pen out toward me. "Sign the paper, Lauren," she said. "Let us take care of you. Stop fighting. You are only hurting yourself." I looked at the paper. It was a death warrant for my independence. It was a document that would give them legal cover to strip me of everything my grandfather had intended for me, all under the guise of mental health protection. "No," I said. Dad stepped forward. His face was hard, his jaw set. "This isn't a request anymore. Lauren," he said, "if you walk out of here tonight without signing that document, I will take it as a formal resignation from this family." "A resignation?" I asked, looking at him. "I mean it," he said. "If you don't trust us, then you are not one of us. I will have the lawyers draft a new will tomorrow morning. You will be cut out completely. No inheritance, no shares, nothing. You will be a stranger to the Hartley name." The room was dead silent. This was the nuclear option. He was threatening to disown me to protect his wife's greed. "You are going to disown me because I won't let you rob Grandma?" I asked. "I am disowning you because you are a toxic, ungrateful child who has done nothing but take from us," Dad shouted, losing his composure again. "Look at you. You stand there in your expensive dress, looking down your nose at us. Who paid for that dress? Lauren? Who put a roof over your head? Who bought you that car you drove here in?" I almost laughed. The absurdity of it was suffocating. "The Audi?" I asked. "The gray Audi parked out front?" "Yes," Dad yelled. "I signed the lease on that car. I gave it to you so you could get to that job of yours." "You co-signed," I corrected him quietly, "because I was 22 and had no credit history. But I have made every single payment for 6 years. Dad, I paid off the lease 2 months ago. The title is in the glove box." "I don't care," he spittle flying from his mouth. "It is in my name. I want the keys. Give me the keys." He held out his hand. He wanted to humiliate me. He wanted to strip me of my transportation, leave me stranded in the suburbs, a helpless little girl who needed Daddy to drive her home. I reached into my clutch. I pulled out the fob for the Audi. "Here," I said. I tossed them. They arced through the air and landed with a heavy thunk on the table, right next to the cake with his face on it. "Take it," I said. "It needs new brake pads anyway." "And the name," Elise chimed in, sensing blood in the water. "You use the Hartley name professionally, don't you? Lauren Hartley Ramirez? It opens doors for you. Well, if you are not family, you don't get the name. I think we should speak to legal about a cease and desist." "You want me to change my name?" I asked, staring at her. "I want you to cut ties completely," Elise said, her eyes cold and dead. "Before you drag us all down with your insanity, before you try to sue us with some made-up story, just go. Lauren, go back to your sad little apartment and leave us alone." I stood there, stripped bare. They had taken my money. They had taken my father. Now they wanted my car and my name. They had hollowed me out until there was nothing left but the truth. I looked down the table. Most of my relatives were looking at their laps, ashamed to witness this, but too cowardly to stop it. They were complicit in their silence. But at the end of the table, Grandma Evelyn was watching. She hadn't moved. Her hands were still on her bag. Her eyes were locked on mine, dark and intense. "Lauren," she said. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, but in the silence, it was thunder. "Yes, Grandma?" "Are you safe?" she asked. "Do you have a way home?" I looked at her. I saw the worry in her face. She was ready to intervene. She was ready to blow her cover to protect me. But it wasn't time yet. If she spoke now, before they signed the papers, before they fully committed to the fraud, they could still wiggle out of it. They could claim it was just a family argument. I had to be the sacrifice for 5 more minutes. "I am fine, Grandma." I lied. My voice didn't shake. I refused to let it shake. "I have Uber. I have my own money. I have always been safe." I looked back at Dad. "You want to cut the financial ties?" I asked. "Fine. Let's do it properly." I gestured to the waiter who was hovering in the corner, looking terrified. "Separate checks, please," I said. "I will pay for my water, and since I'm no longer family, I assume I am not paying for the deposit on this room anymore, or the wine on the table?" "We don't need your money," Dad shouted. His pride stung. "Arthur, bring me the bill. The whole thing. I will pay for everything. I am done letting her hold money over our heads like some kind of weapon." It was almost funny. He was going to put a $5,000 dinner on a credit card that I knew was maxed out, linked to an account that was currently overdrawn because I had stopped the auto transfer yesterday. "Good luck with that, Dad," I said softly. I turned around. My cheek was throbbing. My heart was broken. I felt a loneliness so profound it felt like physical weight pressing down on my chest. I was walking away from the only family I had ever known. I was walking away from the memory of my mother, whose name they had twisted. "Get out!" Elise shrieked one last time behind me. "And don't you dare come back!" I walked through the double doors. I walked down the long hallway, past the staring diners, past the sympathetic manager. I pushed open the heavy front doors of the copper lantern and stepped out into the night. The air was biting cold. It was starting to rain again, a freezing drizzle that pricked my skin. I stood on the sidewalk, shivering in my green dress, without a car, without a coat, without a father. I felt like a child again. I felt small and abandoned. I reached into my purse to call a ride. My fingers numb. The phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down at the screen through blurred vision. It was a text message. It wasn't from Dad. It wasn't from Grandma. It was from Marina Cole. Message. "Audio is crystal clear. I heard the threat to disown. I heard the demand for the car. I heard the admission of the trust restructuring plan. We have everything we need for the conspiracy charge." A second message popped up immediately after. Message. "Marcus is in position at the bar. He says the grandmother just opened her bag. Are you ready for phase 2? I stared at the phone. The cold wind didn't feel so biting anymore. The pain in my cheek faded into a dull background noise. I wiped the single tear that had managed to escape my eye. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sharp, wet air. I wasn't the little girl left out in the cold. I was the demolition expert, and I had just walked out of the building before the charges blew. I typed back 2 words. "Burn it." I was standing on the sidewalk, the cold rain seeping into the fabric of my dress, but my mind was back in that private dining room. I pressed the receiver of my phone tight against my ear, listening to the live audio feed transmitting from the device I had slipped into the floral centerpiece just before I walked out. I didn't need to see the room to know what was happening. I knew the players, I knew the script, and thanks to Marcus, who was texting me play-by-play updates from his vantage point at the bar, I could visualize every movement. Inside the room, the air must have felt heavy, charged with the static of the violence that had just occurred, but Elise was a creature of momentum. She wouldn't let a little thing like assaulting her stepdaughter derail her payday. "Okay, everyone, take a breath," I heard Elise say on the feed. Her voice was bright, brittle, forcing a sense of normalcy. "I am so sorry you had to see that. Lauren has been struggling for a long time, but we cannot let her illness ruin Raymond's night. We are a family. We move forward." "Here is the plan," my father chimed in. He sounded breathless, likely chugging his scotch to drown the memory of my face. "We are going to pass these papers around. It is a simple signature. Once we have the consensus, the quarterly stipends will be locked in. Everyone gets a check on the 1st of the month. Regular, reliable." I heard the rustle of paper. They were passing the trust documents, the bribe. Just sign on the last page, Elise directed, her tone sweetening. It ensures that the assets are managed professionally. No more chaos, no more drama. I don't know, Ray. Uncle Bob's voice came through, hesitant. Lauren seemed... She had specific dates. The bank logs? Paranoia, Bob! Elise laughed, a sharp, barking sound. It is a classic symptom. She fabricates details to fit her narrative. Please, just sign. For Mom's sake, we need to secure her care. I closed my eyes, imagining the scene. My cousins, afraid of conflict, picking up their pens. My aunts, wanting the quarterly check, looking away from the truth. They all turned to the end of the table, to Grandma Evelyn. She was the linchpin. Without her signature, or her declared incapacitation, the rest of it was just paper. Mom, Elise cooed. The sound of her heels clicking on the floor as she walked toward the head of the table was audible. It is your turn. Look, I put a nice big X where you need to sign. It is just to help us take better care of you. You want us to look after the house, don't you? There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. Mom, Dad urged, just sign it, then we can have cake. I heard the distinct sound of paper sliding across the tablecloth. Marcus texted me at that exact moment. The old lady just pushed the papers back. She didn't even look at them. Mom, you are being difficult. Elise's voice dropped an octave, losing the sweetness. We discussed this. You are confused. You need to let us handle the details. I heard the paper slide again. Elise was shoving it back in front of Grandma, trying to force her hand. Sign it, Elise hissed. Now. And then, the door to the private room opened. Excuse me, a new voice cut in. It was Arthur, the manager. His tone was polite but firm, the voice of a man who had run out of patience. Mr. Hartley? I hate to interrupt, but there is an issue with the card you gave us for the deposit balance. It was declined, and the card on file for the wine service, that one was declined as well. That is ridiculous, Dad spluttered. Run it again. We ran it 3 times, sir, Arthur said. Perhaps we can step outside to discuss an alternative form of payment? The humiliation was absolute. I had cut the line. Dad was standing there, playing the patriarch, with $0 to his name. I will call the bank, Dad stammered. It is a fraud hold, because of what Lauren did. It is not a fraud hold, Raymond, a voice said. It wasn't Elise. It wasn't Arthur. It was a voice I hadn't heard sound this strong in 10 years. Grandma, I whispered to the rainy street. Inside the room, the silence that followed was absolute. Marcus told me later that when she spoke, Grandma Evelyn didn't just speak. She raised her hand. She lifted her right hand slowly into the air. Palm open, fingers steady. It was a gesture of command. It was a stop sign. It froze the room. The forks stopped clinking. The whispering died. Even Elise, who was hovering over her with a pen, froze in place. Mother, put your hand down, Elise snapped, nervous now. You are making a scene. I said, Grandma Evelyn repeated, her voice low but hard as steel, that it is not a fraud hold, and before I sign a single piece of paper in this room, I have a question. She paused. I held my breath. I want to clarify, Grandma said, enunciating every syllable. Exactly who in this family has been trying to steal money from my granddaughter? The room exploded with noise, a collective gasp, a murmur of shock. Oh, for heaven's sake, Elise laughed, but it sounded like she was choking. She is doing it too. She is confused. Lauren got inside her head with those lies. Mom, you don't know what you are saying. Do I not? Grandma asked. I heard the sound of a zipper, the heavy metallic rasp of her old leather handbag opening. You say Lauren is paranoid, Grandma said calmly. You say she invents things, but I have something here. The rustle of paper being unfolded. This is a log, Grandma said. From my private conversations with a lawyer named Marina Cole, and with Lauren. You You talked to her lawyer? Dad's voice was trembling. I did, Grandma said. And this morning, I had a technician come to my house, a nice young man. He traced the internet connection. He told me that the attempts to break into Lauren's accounts, the ones she just told you about, came from the router in your living room. Raymond, my living room. That is a lie, Elise shrieked. She is senile. She does not even know what a router is. I know that a thief is a thief, Grandma cut her off. The power in her voice was terrifying. And I know that for the last 6 months, I have watched you. I have watched you. Elise, look at my house like it was a pile of cash waiting to be shoveled into your purse. I have watched you. Raymond, look at your own daughter like she was nothing more than a checkbook. Mom, please, Dad begged. We are doing this for the family, for the legacy. The legacy? Grandma laughed, a dry, bitter sound. You speak of the Hartley legacy? Let me tell you about the legacy. I could hear her shifting in her chair. I imagined her sitting up straighter, shedding the frailty she had worn like a disguise. Every dollar that Lauren gave you, Grandma said, her voice rising, filling the room. The money for your cars, the money for your club memberships, the money for this ridiculous dinner. Where do you think it came from? She works for it. Yes, but the foundation? The safety net? That came from the sweat of my husband, your father. She slammed her hand on the table. The silverware jumped. You were not just robbing Lauren, Grandma roared. You were robbing me. Because when you steal from the one person who has actually sacrificed to keep this family afloat, you are spitting on the grave of the man who built this name. We didn't know, Dad stammered. We thought she had plenty. We thought she wanted to help. You thought she was weak, Grandma corrected him. And you thought I was dead. Well, I am not dead yet. This is nonsense, Elise spat. The papers are drawn up. Vane and Partners have the power of attorney. You signed it. Evelyn, you signed it 2 years ago when you had that fall. You cannot stop this. We are the trustees. Ah, Grandma said softly. The fall, yes. I signed a medical release form. Or so you told me. It was a durable power of attorney, Elise yelled triumphantly. And it gives us control. So sit down, shut up, and let us manage the assets before you ruin us all. I showed that document to my lawyer, Grandma said. You don't have a lawyer, Elise screamed. We fired old Henderson years ago. You fired him, Grandma said. I kept him. I have been paying his retainer in cash for 5 years. Money I kept in a lockbox under my bed. Money Lauren didn't know about. Money you didn't know about. What? Dad whispered. Mr. Henderson reviewed your little trust document, Grandma said. And he reviewed the power of attorney you tricked me into signing. And do you know what he found? Silence. He found fraud, Grandma declared. He found coercion, and because I never knowingly entered into that agreement, and because I have a sworn affidavit stating that you misled me about the nature of the document, it is void. It is worthless paper. Elise, you can use it to wipe your mouth. I heard the sound of paper tearing. Grandma was ripping up the contract. Reep. You cannot do that, Elise shrieked. That is a legal document. It is confetti, Grandma said. And now, for the real news. I pressed the phone harder against my ear. This was the moment. This was the kill shot. I assumed this day would come, Grandma said, her voice calm again, terrifyingly composed. So 3 years ago, I made a new trust, the Evelyn Hartley Legacy Trust. We never authorized that, Dad said. It is my money, Raymond, Grandma snapped. I do not need your permission, and in this trust, I have designated a sole beneficiary and a sole trustee. Who? Elise whispered. Who did you give it to? Some charity? Some cat shelter? I gave it to the only person in this room who has a spine, Grandma said. I could feel the eyes of the room shifting. Lauren, Grandma said. Lauren? Dad choked. But she is unstable. We just told you. She is sick. She is the sanest person I know, Grandma retorted. She has been paying your debts for a decade without asking for credit. She has been protecting me while you plotted to lock me away. So, as of this morning, when the final notarized documents were filed, Lauren Ramirez is the controlling shareholder of Hartley Meridian Holdings. She owns the house in Riverside Heights. She controls the voting block. No, Elise moaned. No, no, no. That house is worth $2 million. The shares, that is our retirement. It was your retirement, Grandma corrected. Now, it is her asset, and according to the stipulations I wrote into the trust, anyone who attempts to challenge her authority, or anyone who is found to have engaged in financial abuse against the estate, is automatically disinherited, cut off, zero. Mom, you can't, Dad pleaded. I am your son. Then start acting like it, Grandma yelled. Because right now, you look like a thief standing next to a woman who would sell my teeth for a handbag. I have rights, Elise screamed. I am his wife. I have marital rights to the estate. You have nothing. Grandma's voice dropped to a lethal whisper. And unless you want Lauren to file the police report she has prepared, and yes, I know about the report, and I know about the IP logs, and I am ready to testify that you tried to rob her, then I suggest you sit down and shut your mouth. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a world ending. Now, Grandma said, her voice returning to a conversational tone, as if she hadn't just executed her son's future. Mr. Manager? Yes, ma'am? Arthur's voice sounded awestruck. My granddaughter paid the deposit for this dinner, correct? Yes, ma'am. $5,000. And she has left? Yes, ma'am. Good, Grandma said. Then this party is over. I am not paying for people who slap my air in the face. Wrap up the cake. I am taking it to Lauren's apartment. The rest of you? You can figure out how to pay the bill. I hear there is a dishwasher position open in the kitchen. I heard the scrape of a chair. Grandma was standing up. Raymond, she said one last time, you wanted a retirement party? Congratulations. You are retired. Permanently. The feed went dead. Marcus must have cut it as the chaos erupted. I stood on the sidewalk, the rain plastering my hair to my face. My cheek was still throbbing, but the pain felt distant now. I looked down at my phone. A text from Marcus appeared. Text. That was the most gangster thing I've ever seen. The old lady is walking out. Elise is screaming at a waiter. Your dad is crying into his scotch. Do you want me to drive Grandma to you? I typed back with shaking fingers. Text. Yes. Bring her home. I lowered the phone. I looked up at the dark sky. For the first time in 10 years, the weight on my shoulders was gone. I wasn't the bank anymore. I wasn't the victim. I was the CEO. And Grandma Evelyn? She was the closer. 3 days after the dinner at the Copper Lantern, we gathered in the conference room of a neutral law firm in downtown Chicago. The room was a study in sterile intimidation, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a gray view of the city skyline and a long, polished table that reflected the fluorescent lights overhead. On one side of the table sat my father, Raymond, and Elise. They looked like they had aged 10 years in 72 hours. Dad was wearing a suit that seemed a size too big for him now. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Elise was dressed in black, stiff and upright, her eyes darting around the room like a trapped bird. Their lawyer, a man named Mr. Sterling, who looked like he billed $600 an hour to make problems disappear, sat between them. On the other side sat me, Marina Cole, and Mr. Henderson, my grandmother's longtime attorney whom Elise had claimed was fired years ago, and at the head of the table, in a wheelchair she didn't really need, but used to emphasize her frailty, sat Grandma Evelyn. There were no pleasantries. There was no coffee. We are here to discuss the disposition of the Hartley estate, Mr. Henderson began, his voice gravelly and authoritative, and to address pending civil and criminal complaints regarding the management of said estate. This is a misunderstanding, Mr. Sterling interrupted smoothly. My clients were acting in the best interests of an elderly relative. Any attempt to frame this as theft is a gross mischaracterization of family dynamics. Marina didn't look up from her laptop. She simply pressed a key. The sound of a recording filled the silent room. It was high fidelity, captured by the app on my phone during the dinner. The acoustics were perfect. Voice of Elise. The walking ATM is coming for Christmas. Remember? I will give her a sob story about the roof leaking. She will write a check before dessert. Elise flinched. Dad closed his eyes. Marina let it play. The room heard Dad threatening to disown me. They heard Elise demanding my car keys. And then, the climax. The sound of a sharp, violent slap. Voice of Lauren. Dad, she just hit me. Voice of Raymond. I said get her out. She is hysterical. Marina stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush lungs. Assault, Marina listed, ticking off her fingers. Extortion, and conspiracy to commit fraud. We have the audio evidence of the intent. Now, let's look at the execution. She slid a stack of papers across the table toward Mr. Sterling. These are forensic logs from Sentinel Arc Analytics, Marina said. They show a sustained pattern of unauthorized access to Lauren Ramirez's bank accounts over the last 6 months. The login attempts coincide with dates and times where your clients can be placed at their residence. A Wi-Fi router is not a fingerprint, Elise snapped, finding her voice. Our network is unsecured. Anyone could have parked outside and hacked it. You cannot prove it was us. I leaned forward. This was my domain. Actually, Elise, I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the emotion that had choked me at the dinner. Every device that connects to a network has a media access control address, a MAC address. It is a unique hardware identifier, like a digital fingerprint. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my folder. The device used to attempt the transfer of $750,000 on Tuesday night has the MAC address ending in A4F9. I read, I ran a cross-reference with the device registry from the family iCloud account, which I still had access to until this morning. I looked directly at Elise. That MAC address belongs to a MacBook Pro registered to Elise Hartley, I said. The laptop is named Elise's Empire, unless a hacker broke into your house, sat at your kitchen island, and guessed your password. It was you. Mr. Sterling looked at the paper, then he looked at his clients. He closed his folder slightly, a subtle gesture of distancing himself. We can argue the technicalities of access in court, Mr. Sterling said, though he sounded less confident. But the core issue here is the estate. Mr. Hartley holds a power of attorney for his mother. He has the right to manage family assets. He holds a fraudulent document, Mr. Henderson corrected him, and as of this morning, that document has been formally challenged in probate court with an affidavit of incapacity, not regarding Evelyn, but regarding her understanding of what she was signing due to deliberate deception. Mr. Henderson opened a thick leather binder. Furthermore, he continued, the document you are relying on is moot, because the assets you are trying to control have already been moved. Moved? Dad whispered. Moved where? Into the Evelyn Hartley Legacy Trust, Mr. Henderson announced. Established 3 years ago, this trust holds the deed to the Riverside Heights property, 90% of the voting shares of Hartley Meridian Holdings, and the entirety of Evelyn's liquid savings. He handed copies of the trust to the other side of the table. The terms are simple, Mr. Henderson explained. The trust is designed to skip a generation. The primary beneficiary and sole trustee is Lauren Ramirez. Elise made a sound like a wounded animal, a high, thin whimper. However, Mr. Henderson raised a finger. There are stipends allocated for other family members, a modest monthly allowance to ensure no one starves. Dad let out a breath, looking relieved. Okay, so we still get something. We can work with that. You did not let me finish, Mr. Henderson said. His eyes behind his wire-rimmed glasses were cold. Section 8, Paragraph C, the bad actor clause. He began to read from the document. If any beneficiary is found to have engaged in financial abuse, identity theft, or coercion against the grantor or the primary trustee, or if they attempt to challenge the validity of this trust through frivolous litigation, their interest in the trust is immediately and irrevocably terminated. The room went dead silent again. "Terminated?" Dad asked, his voice shaking. "Zero," Mr. Henderson said. "No stipend, no house, no shares. You are cut out. Raymond?" "You cannot do that," Elise screamed, slamming her hand on the table. "We are family. She is his mother. She cannot just leave us with nothing." "I can," Grandma Evelyn spoke up. Her voice was clear and strong. "And I have—" She turned her wheelchair slightly to face her son. "I watched you," Grandma said. "For months. I watched you try to steal from your own daughter. I watched you try to sell my home out from under me. And I gave you a chance, at the dinner. I gave you one last chance to put the pen down, to refuse to sign, to be a father." She shook her head slowly. "You failed, Raymond. You chose her greed over your own blood." "But we didn't steal anything," Elise insisted, desperate now. "It was just planning. We were stressed. You cannot prove we had malicious intent." Marina cleared her throat. "Actually, we can—" She pulled out a small USB drive. "Evelyn has been recording her environment for the last 4 months," Marina said. "It is legal in Illinois to record conversations in your own home if you fear for your safety or suspect a crime. Evelyn suspected both." Marina plugged the drive into her laptop and clicked a file labeled Kitchen September 14. The audio crackled to life. It was the echoey sound of a kitchen conversation. Voice of Elise. "How long do you think the old bat will last? She is tough." Voice of Raymond. "I don't know, but the upkeep on this house is killing me. We need to get her into that facility in Oak Park, the state-run one." Voice of Elise. "The one with the bad reviews? Perfect. Dump her there. She won't know the difference, and then we can sell this place and finally buy the condo in Florida." Voice of Raymond. "We have to be careful. Lauren might ask questions." Voice of Elise. "Lauren is an idiot. She is desperate for you to love her. Just smile at her. Ray, tell her you are proud of her. She will sign whatever we put in front of her. We can bleed her dry and then cut her loose." The recording ended. Dad was weeping. He had his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking. It wasn't the noble crying of a man wrongly accused. It was the pathetic sobbing of a man who had been caught in his own filth. Elise sat frozen. Her face had gone pale, stripping away the layers of makeup to reveal something raw and terrified underneath. Mr. Sterling, their lawyer, slowly closed his laptop. He looked at Dad, then at Elise. "I cannot represent you in this matter any longer," Mr. Sterling said quietly. "This recording, this admits to conspiracy to commit elder abuse and fraud. My advice to you, Mr. Hartley, is to cooperate fully with the plaintiff. If you testify against your wife regarding the identity theft, you might avoid jail time." "Jail?" Elise whispered. "Identity theft is a felony," Marina reminded her. "Wire fraud is a federal crime, and attempting to defraud a senior citizen carries a mandatory minimum sentence in this state." Elise looked at Dad. "Ray, say something. Tell them it was your idea." Dad looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. He looked at me, then at Grandma. "She made me do it," Dad blubbered. "I didn't want to. She said we needed the money. She said Lauren had too much. It was Elise. It was all Elise." "You coward!" Elise screamed. She lunged across the table, clawing at his face. "You spineless little worm! You were happy enough to spend the money. You were happy enough to drive the car." "Mr. Sterling had to physically restrain her, pulling her back into her chair. "That is enough," Mr. Henderson barked. The room settled into a vibrating tension. Elise was panting, her hair disheveled. She looked at me with pure hatred. "You think you won?" she spat. "You think you are better than me? I built this family's image. I made us look like something. I deserve that money. I earned it by putting up with you and your senile grandmother for 10 years. "And that," Marina said, typing on her keyboard, "is the final admission we needed for the civil suit." I stood up. I smoothed the front of my skirt. I felt incredibly calm. It was the calm of a balance sheet that finally zeroed out. "Here is what is going to happen," I said. I didn't look at Dad. I looked only at Elise. "We are freezing the assets today. The house in Riverside Heights belongs to the trust. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. If you take so much as a silver spoon, I will have you arrested for theft." 30 days? Dad asked weakly. "Where will we go?" "I don't know, Dad," I said. "Maybe you can find a place with the money you earned. Oh, wait, you don't have any." "Lauren, please," he begged. "I am 65. "You are a healthy man," Grandma said from her wheelchair. "You can work. I hear Walmart is hiring greeters. You always were good at smiling at people while lying to them." I turned to Marina. "File the papers, the civil suit for the stolen funds, the restraining order, and the petition to remove them from the company board." "Consider it done," Marina said. I walked over to Grandma Evelyn. I took the handles of her wheelchair. "We are leaving now," I announced. "Lauren," Dad called out as I turned the chair toward the door. "Lauren, wait. I am sorry. I am so sorry." I stopped. I looked back at him one last time. I saw the man who had promised me it was us against the world, and I realized that man had died a long time ago. The thing sitting in that chair was just a ghost with a gambling problem. "You are not sorry you did it, Dad," I said. "You are just sorry you picked the wrong victim." I pushed Grandma out of the conference room, leaving them in the glass box, trapped with their lawyer, their lies, and the ruin they had built with their own hands. As we reached the elevator, Grandma reached up and patted my hand. "That went well," she said. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "I thought Elise would throw a chair." "She wanted to," Grandma chuckled. "But she knows that if she damages the furniture, she cannot afford to pay for it." The elevator doors opened. We stepped inside, leaving the 42nd floor behind, descending back down to the street, back to the real world, where the air was clean and the debts were paid. The hallway outside courtroom 4B was quiet, filled only with the humming of the industrial fluorescent lights and the distant sound of a janitor buffering the floors. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of the dinner party, but the air felt cleaner here. The judge had just signed the permanent protection order. It was a piece of paper, but to me and Grandma Evelyn, it was a shield. I walked out of the double doors, pushing Grandma in her wheelchair. We were heading toward the elevators, ready to leave this chapter behind, when a figure stepped out from the alcove near the water fountains. It was Elise. She looked nothing like the woman who had held court at the Copper Lantern. The shimmering silver dress was gone, replaced by a frantic, ill-fitting pantsuit that looked like she had pulled it off a clearance rack at a discount store. Her hair, usually sprayed into helmet-like perfection, was limp and pulled back in a messy knot. Her roots were showing. She blocked our path, her hands trembling. "Are you happy?" she screamed. Her voice echoed off the marble walls, shrill and desperate. "Are you happy now, Lauren? You took everything. You robbed me. You stole the life I built." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "I gave up the best years of my life for this family," she yelled. "I curated that house. I managed the social calendar. I made us respectable. And you jealous, miserable little spinster, you took it all away because you could not stand to see your father happy." She took a step closer, her eyes wild. "You will die alone, Lauren," she hissed. "You will sit on that pile of money in that empty apartment, and you will rot. No one will love you. You are cold. You are a machine." I stopped the wheelchair. I looked at her. I didn't feel fear anymore. I didn't feel anger. I felt a strange, distant pity, like looking at a bug trapped in a jar. "You are confused, Elise," I said calmly. "You didn't build a life. You burned one." "Excuse me?" she spat. "You didn't build anything," I continued, my voice steady. "You took the equity my grandfather earned and you spent it on vacations. You took the salary my father earned and spent it on appearances. And when that wasn't enough, you took the money I earned, the money I sacrificed my 20s to make, and you threw it into a hole that never filled up. You didn't build a legacy. You just lit a bonfire with other people's sacrifices to keep yourself warm. I took a step toward her. She flinched. Today isn't a robbery, I said. It is just the bill coming due, and for the first time in your life, you have to pay it. Elise opened her mouth to scream again, but the fight seemed to drain out of her. She slumped against the wall, sobbing into her hands, a broken woman who had realized too late that charm is not a currency that works in a courtroom. Lauren. The voice came from behind Elise. It was quiet, raspy, and sounded incredibly old. My father stepped out from the shadows. If Elise looked disheveled, Raymond Hartley looked diminished, without his tailored Italian suit, without the expensive watch, without the head of the table to sit at. He seemed to have shrunk 3 sizes. He was wearing a windbreaker that looked like it belonged to a stranger. His face was gray. He couldn't look me in the eye. He looked at his shoes. He looked at the floor tiles. He looked anywhere but at the daughter he had tried to defraud. Lauren, he said again, I wanted to say, I didn't know. You didn't know what, Dad? I asked. I didn't know she was going to take it this far, he mumbled, gesturing vaguely at Elise. The pressure. She was always worried about money. She said we were drowning. I just wanted peace. I tried to stop her. In my own way. He looked up at me then, his eyes wet with tears. I am sorry, kiddo, he said. I really am. We can fix this, right? We are family. It is us against the world, remember? The phrase hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Us against the world. He dared to use it now, after everything. I looked at him, and I searched my heart for the anger I had carried for so long, but it was gone. The rage had burned itself out, leaving only a vast, empty space where my love for him used to be. I have a question for you, Dad, I said. Anything, he said, a spark of hope lighting in his eyes. Ask me anything. When did it happen? I asked. When did what happen? When did you decide that I was a bank and not your daughter? He froze. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He blinked, the realization of the question hitting him like a physical blow. Was it when I paid for your hip surgery? I asked softly. Was it when I paid off your credit card debt the first time? Or was it earlier? Was it when Mom died, and you looked at me and realized I was the only person left who wouldn't say no to you? Lauren, no, it is not like that, he stammered. It is exactly like that, I said. You didn't protect me. Dad, you harvested me. You let her strip me for parts because it was easier than getting a job. He stood there, silence stretching between us, unable to answer because there was no answer that wasn't a confession. I spoke to the district attorney, I said. Dad flinched. They wanted to press criminal charges against you too, I told him. Conspiracy, wire fraud, but I told them no. Thank you, he breathed, looking relieved. Thank you, Lauren. Don't thank me, I said cold. I didn't do it for you. I did it because I don't want the name Ramirez dragged through a criminal trial with you. I am not sending you to jail, Dad, but I am not taking you back either. What do you mean? I mean you are on your own, I said. No checks, no dinners, no phone calls. You have your wife, you have your freedom, but you don't have a daughter anymore. You can't mean that, he whispered. Grandma Evelyn cleared her throat. The sound was sharp, cutting through the emotional fog. She turned her wheelchair so she was facing her son. She means it. Raymond, Grandma said. Mom, Dad pleaded. Talk to her. Tell her she is being unreasonable. Grandma shook her head slowly. She reached out and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. You had 1,000 chances. Raymond, she said. You had a loyal daughter. You had a mother who loved you, and you spent us. You spent our love just like you spent the money. You are overdrawn, and your account is closed. She looked at me. Let's go. Lauren, the air is stale here. We walked past them. I didn't look back. I walked toward the elevators, leaving my father and Elise standing in the empty hallway, 2 ghosts haunting a life they had already destroyed. Inside the courtroom, The victory had been absolute. The judge, a no-nonsense woman who had frowned deeply while listening to the audio recordings, had signed off on the settlement. Elise was ordered to repay $200,000 in misappropriated funds, money she would likely have to sell her jewelry and designer clothes to cover. She was permanently banned from any involvement with Hartley Meridian Holdings. Furthermore, the judge had forwarded the evidence of the identity theft to the state prosecutor's office for a separate criminal investigation. Elise wasn't just broke. She was looking at probation or prison time. As for the company, the court recognized the validity of the Evelyn Hartley Legacy Trust. I was legally affirmed as the co-trustee and majority shareholder. The company, the house, and Grandma's future were safe. But the real victory didn't happen in court. It happened that evening, back at Grandma's small cottage. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light through the kitchen window. We made tea. It was quiet. There were no lawyers, no yelling, just the sound of the kettle whistling. Grandma wheeled herself into the bedroom and came back holding the battered lockbox she had told me about. She placed it on the table. "Open it," she said. I used the key I had carried in my clutch. The lid creaked open. Inside, there were stacks of cash, the retainer for Mr. Henderson, but underneath the money, there was a small, black notebook. I picked it up. It was worn at the edges. I opened it. It was a ledger. January 12, 2018. Lauren paid for the roof repair. $5,000. Raymond claimed he paid it. March 4, 2019. Lauren paid for Elise's car note. $800. December 25, 2020. Lauren sent a check for Christmas. $10,000. Elise bought a handbag. Page after page, year after year, Grandma had recorded every single penny I had given them, every lie they had told, every sacrifice I had made. I looked up at her, tears blurring my vision. "Grandma, you knew? All this time?" "I knew," she whispered. "From the moment Elise walked through the door. I knew she was a wolf, and I knew your father was too weak to stop her." "Why didn't you say something?" I asked. "Why didn't you stop me?" "Because you had to see it for yourself," she said gently. "If I had told you 5 years ago, would you have believed me? Or would you have defended him? You loved him so much. Lauren, you needed to save him. I had to wait until you were ready to save yourself." She reached across the table and touched the notebook. "I wrote it all down," she said, "because I wanted to make sure that when the day came, I could prove to you that you weren't crazy, and I wanted to make sure that every cent you gave them, I would find a way to pay you back, in the trust. I have adjusted the distribution. You get back every dollar recorded in this book, with interest, before anyone else sees a dime." I closed the book. I felt a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't even realized I was carrying. I wasn't just a bank to everyone. Someone had been watching. Someone had been keeping score for me. "We need to move," I said, wiping my eyes. "Move?" Grandma asked. "This cottage is too small," I said. "And the house in Riverside Heights? It has too many ghosts. We will sell it. We will sell both of them." I took a sip of tea. "I saw a place in the city," I said. "A penthouse. It has an elevator, so no stairs. It has a guest suite that is bigger than this whole kitchen. And it has a view of the lake. It is secure. Doorman. Cameras. No one gets in unless we say so." Grandma smiled. "It sounds expensive." "It is," I said. "But I can afford it, and so can you." I looked at her seriously. "But there are conditions," I said. "Oh?" Grandma raised an eyebrow. "You are negotiating with me now?" "Yes," I said. "We are not doing this as granddaughter taking care of Grandma. We are doing this as partners. We both sign the lease. We both pay our share. We are roommates. I am not your nurse, and you are not my dependent. We are the two women who survived the Hartley men. Deal?" Grandma's smile widened into a grin. She reached out her hand. "Deal," she said. We shook on it. We walked out onto the front porch to watch the sunset. The sky was a brilliant canvas of purple and orange. The rain had stopped, leaving the world smelling fresh and new. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was an email from the CEO of Sentinel Arc Analytics. The subject line read, "Promotion offer. Director of Global Risk." It was the job I had wanted for 5 years. It came with a massive raise, a corner office, and prestige. It was everything the old Lauren, the one who needed to prove her worth through money, would have died for. I looked at the email. Then I looked at Grandma, who was closing her eyes, enjoying the breeze on her face. I swiped the notification away. I didn't open it. It would be there tomorrow. It would be there next week. Right now, I didn't need the title. I didn't need the validation. I had just closed the biggest case of my life. I had identified the threat, isolated the risk, and neutralized the bad actors. I put the phone back in my pocket. I stood next to my grandmother, watching the sun dip below the horizon, signaling the end of the long, dark day and the beginning of a tomorrow that finally truly belonged to me. "Ready for dinner?" Grandma asked. "I'm buying." "Pizza?" I suggested. "Pizza," she agreed. "And this time, let's get the extra cheese. We can afford it." I laughed. It was a real laugh, light and free. "Yes," I said, "we certainly can." Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and tell me which part of the story shocked you the most. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so more people can hear this story. Your support means the world to us.